Abiola, it'll say go live up on the left hand. It'll be
It
a
says
green
live
bar.
already.
Live.
Okay. All right. Good morning, and welcome to Independence Now's Black and Brown Lives Matter online conference and online protest, which will be taking place later this in the program, starting at 1 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. I wanted to start by welcoming our panelists for today and introducing them. Our panelists are Dr. Mana Ali, who've waved, yes, Dr. Donald Walton, Mr. Norrell McMillan, who's on the phone line, as well as Mike Sanders, who could please wave. And later on, we'll have Carmen Belmont. And so I want to start by sharing the reason why Independence Now is hosting this particular conference. We are one of 7 of Maryland's Centers for Independent Living, or CILs. And as a Center for Independent Living, Independence Now fights to ensure civil rights and and equity for people with disabilities, regardless of color or race. We stand in absolute solidarity with advocacy programs, organizations, and others across the country in condemning all violence, particularly violence motivated by discrimination and racism against Black and Brown people. We therefore stand in support of the Black Lives Matter protest and against the violence against the Black and Brown community in the effort to dismantle the systems that have allowed racial injustice. The recurring trauma of violence and death caused by the police is a burden that no person or community should have to carry. Systemic racism and accompanying violence in this country continue to take and devalue Black and Brown lives, including the lives of persons with disability, at disproportionate rates in comparison to whites. Black people are 3 times more likely to be killed at the hands of police than whites. Our position is it has got to stop, and it has to stop with us. And so, with that, I want to turn over the opening comments of today's conference to Dr. Mana Ali. Dr. Ali, did we lose her? I don't see her. Oh, there she is. Okay, Dr. Ali.
Thanks for having me. This is such a great initiative. And for those of you who don't know me, I'm a psychologist at National Rehabilitation Hospital, and my particular interest and I would say expertise is in health disparities, which is definitely relevant when we talk about racial inequities. So just to guide the conversation, I'll share my screen with you. Gabriella, I tend to talk a lot, so please remind me of time. And please don't hesitate to remind me of time because I know time is limited. Um, so I want to get started by first just making sure we're all using the same language here. So health disparities refers to differences, right? Disparities suggest that there's some differences when you're comparing or contrasting different populations. I want to focus on equality and equity, more specifically racial equity, because a lot of the disparities that we talk about are tied to inequities. So this is a picture that sort of depicts the difference between equality and equity. In the picture to your left, there's 3 people attempting to look over a large fence. They all have the same size box, so equal size boxes. And as you can see, because of different heights, because of wheelchair use, just because they have the same boxes, they still don't have access to the field. The picture to the right of the screen shows equity. Equality suggests that the boxes are the same size. Equity ensures that there are access to resources so that the outcomes are identical. And equity is usually attached to the fact that we have to look at systems. We have to look at our history of oppressing vulnerable populations. So I hope that makes sense. I want to talk about health inequity and some of the risk factors. COVID-19 really galvanized discussion around racial inequities. As you know, African Americans and people of color were more at risk to contract COVID-19, but also more at risk to die from the condition. And so there's been lots of conversations around poverty, um, increased increase or decrease access to healthcare, underlying medical conditions, poor access to insurance. But the root of all of these things, the thing that ties or threads these factors together are systemic injustices, systemic racism, right? Because if you take something like poverty or take something like chronic medical conditions, that's just the tip of the iceberg. These things exist by design. These things exist because of policies that are rooted in racism. We see these inequities not just in COVID-19. That's where most of the conversation is happening right now. But these inequities are long-standing. I mean, if you look at general medicine, African Americans and people of color are less likely to receive cardiac interventions, so heart interventions when necessary, kidney interventions, appropriate tests to diagnose cancer, and appropriate medications, especially those for heart conditions. And we know that despite inequities in receiving these treatments, that African Americans and people of color are disproportionately affected by heart conditions, kidney conditions, and so forth. We see it in people who have amputations. I will direct you to the fact that amputations, most of them are in nature. Traumatic meaning like I had a car accident and now I have to have my leg amputated. Most amputations are related to cardiovascular conditions like diabetes and so forth. So African Americans, of course, are disproportionately affected by those chronic conditions and therefore are more likely to have amputations. African Americans are less likely to receive knee and hip replacements despite documented need. They have higher rates of hospital admissions and less likely to have access to a rehab center. And we know coming to a rehab center has implications for recovery and better outcomes. So there's barriers there. Spinal cord injury, African Americans and people of color are less likely to have success at re-engaging in the community after a spinal cord injury, less likely to not have meaningful employment, more likely to get pressure ulcers, which increases the risk for sepsis, infection, and worst case scenarios, death, to be quite honest, more likely to have pain and depression after a spinal cord injury, to report overall poor health, and die early. Pain is an issue where we see these inequities as well, that African Americans and people of color are less likely to receive proper pain medicine and treatment from the medical provider because of provider bias, right? You come into your doctor's office and they already have a narrative of what your intentions are, that you're drug seeking, that you're really not in that much pain. And so these things have negative effects on suffering. If you've had pain, you know the suffering that comes with pain, and to think that it's not being addressed appropriately is pretty sad, or just you can insert an adjective there. Chronic pain conditions, African Americans and people of color are more likely to report disability, depression, other mental health conditions as it relates to pain, and they're less likely to feel like they have control over their pain. And if you don't feel like you can control pain, you're more likely to have suffering or feel helpless. We see disparities in the stroke population. African Americans have higher rates of stroke. They have strokes at younger ages. They're less likely to get to the emergency room and receive proper treatment in a timely fashion. And we know with stroke, the sooner that we intervene, if we can, the better the outcomes. They're less likely to report independence after a stroke and more at risk for rehab readmission. So these statistics are quite concerning, again, across medical conditions and across conditions that are associated with disability and functional impairment. traumatic brain injury, lower rates of employment after traumatic brain injury, poor community integration, which also increases the risk of depression and other mental health concerns. The caregivers of patients who've suffered a traumatic brain injury are more likely to spend time in the caregiving role and to have a hard time with it, to not introduce meaningful activities into their lives. And we know that when we look, and research has shown that when we look at African Americans or people of color compared to Caucasians, they have significantly worse functional outcomes 1 year. And that's after controlling for things like socioeconomic status, things like how they receive their traumatic brain injury. So, what can you do? This is a lot of information. The point is really just to harp on the fact that these inequities exist. And, a lot of the recommendations are focused at the systemic level, and that can feel, I know for everyone who's pulled in different directions, being an advocate, going to Capitol Hill or doing some of this larger work affecting larger institutions could feel overwhelming, could feel discouraging. In the face of COVID, it might be difficult to not feel fear about going out and advocating in person or some of these bigger platforms. But there definitely are things that you can do at the individual level. And so, again, even though these statistics are daunting, I want people to feel empowered. Shared decision making, there's a lot of research on this with providers. We know it works. We know that if patients and who interact with their providers feel empowered to make decisions, ask questions when they don't understand, that they have better outcomes. And remember, you are the expert. Seeing a doctor can be quite intimidating, a medical doctor, especially when you have a new injury or acquire injury, and just because of the power differential. How can I should just listen to my doctor. This person is the expert. But I will tell you, remember, you are the expert on you. Yes, your physiatrist might know about bowel and bladder and this and that and the next steps, but you are the expert on you. So feel empowered to sit at the table and speak up. Assertive communication is something else that's in your reach. Ask questions. Tell providers you don't want a treatment if you don't want it, or there might be a better option. Request that they look into different options. Request a new provider if you need to. But these are things at the individual level that can be done to start to buffer some of the health disparities that we're seeing in our community. We cannot be passive at all, and not even with mental health. We cannot be passive. So I know that we're short on time. I will wrap it up now. I have resources to all of these statistics, so feel free to reach out if that would be helpful and you want to learn more about this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ali. Before we go on to the next speaker, I wonder if you could also quickly address one of the questions I think that you sort of touched on, is that oftentimes my family is from the Caribbean, for example, and oftentimes the issue of treating or getting health care for mental health related disabilities, it's not just that people in the family or friends don't get treatment, they don't even want to talk about it. So one of the concerns I think that sometimes you see in communities of color is that we're not even talking about that. So if you could address that, and also how you yourself came to become a medical health care provider, despite the fact that this is something that many communities of color don't even address.
Oh, no, thank you for bringing that up. So one, I will say, if you fall in the category of not speaking up about your mental health, know that you are not alone. That comes from a place that comes from our history. If you think back through history, we didn't have the luxury to sit around and talk about mental health. There were bigger fish to fry. And in fact, if you think about what we call this hierarchy of needs in psychology, there is no time to think about my mental health and I have to put food on the table, or I'm literally afraid for my safety because of, you know, police brutality in my neighborhood or whatever the case is. But if you have a fear of safety and you have a pressing need to just meet your basic needs, food, shelter, etc., we don't have the luxury to think about mental health. So it doesn't come, that stigma or that doesn't come from the sky. Like there's a reason for that. I will say the best thing you can do is to seek out a provider that looks like you. Or, maybe not that looks like you, but a provider that you trust, right? So people think, and research has shown that these concordant relationships, if you find a provider that you feels like understands you, whether you guys have the same age or same skin color or same cultural background, seek out a provider that looks like you and that trusts you. I'll give an example. We did a research study out of NIH looking for African Americans to participate in the health study. It took us 2 years to get participants just because of NIH. We did the same study at Howard University. It took us 3 weeks. I mean, people were knocking at the door to sign up. I say that because I think it speaks to the fact that people tend to trust people who they feel like get it. So feel inspired to shop around for a psychologist or counselor or life coach that will get it. And if you feel like they don't, feel empowered to fire them and go to the next. That would be my one piece of advice. Shop around, because if you don't feel like they get you, you will not make any progress in working through your mental health concerns.
Okay, Lori has her hand raised. Lori, you're on mute, Lori. Unmute yourself.
Yeah, well, I was going to say, with regard to advocacy, if you can't travel to Capitol Hill or Annapolis, make a phone call to your representative. It makes a difference. When you're a constituent, they really want to hear from us, and it makes a big difference. You can talk to the staffer. It doesn't have to be to the legislator, but it really, really does make a difference. And you can tell them that they can call you if they have a question. It really helps. And then regarding going to see the doctor, it's also good to, if you can prepare questions, if you have questions about yourself and your condition, write them down so you don't forget when you sit in front of the doctor. It can be, so that's a good idea too. Okay.
Thank you, Lori. Does anyone else have any questions? We've got a lot of people on here, but
questions about what?
or questions or response to Dr. Ali's presentation. Did you have something that you wanted to ask or add? Okay. All right.
The presentation was about the Black Lives Matter.
We didn't hear you, Kirpal.
Hey, you keep muting me.
You was asking, how does it pertain to Black Lives Matters?
Is that a question for me or Abiola?
I was just asking that question.
Oh, sure. So I can share my thoughts on that. So health disparities or health inequities are rooted in the same phenomena that Black Lives Matter movement is rooted in. So this is systemic racism. This is overt discrimination. This is, so it's from the same catalyst, if I should say that. So systemic racism and power and privilege, they have a trickle down effect. They trickle down into health. It trickles down into the criminal justice system. So I'm sure that you'll talk about that later during this session, but over incarceration of African Americans, police brutality against African Americans. So both of these, all the inequities that African Americans and people of color face, all are tied to the same issue, the issue of racism, the issue of power and privilege and lack thereof. This narrative that was created historically by the majority or oppressor that's been perpetuated. So it manifests differently, but it's from the same poison. So that's how it relates. I don't know if folks have other things.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
So now we are in the midst of, I guess, the biggest medical situation, of I guess all time, as they would say. So how would, this medical disparity, how would you approach this medical disparity during this time? Because I figure, people have a lot of anxiety, are very afraid, They hear a lot of stuff on television. So, you know, how would they kind of navigate the disparity during this heightened time?
Do you mean, sorry, Damon, do you mean how would someone manage their chronic underlying health conditions during this time?
Well, not underlying health conditions, meaning like the disparities of, you know, just making choices or knowing what's the best thing for your health, for your family, you know, for yourself. When you don't, when you're saying that, okay, people are being mistreated when they go to the doctor, they're getting less care, they're getting less information, they're getting less understanding about what's going on. So that I would think that would still extend into, you know, the exact moment of, you know, what we're going through.
Oh yes, it's definitely related. So, and correct me if I get your question wrong, if I'm not answering it appropriately, or the way, if I misread your question. So what you can do now, what's tangible. So one, Damon, I think that a lot of the work has to come from the system. So providers also have a responsibility to work through some of this. You can't change a provider, but you only can focus on what you have control over. What you have control over in this moment, in the face of disparities, in the face of COVID-19 pandemic, is the things you practicing safe hand hygiene, you social distancing, you asking providers questions, you even if you know what we know now is that people who have chronic conditions like spinal cord injury or brain injury or diabetes, they're fearful of going to the emergency room. Fearful of going to the doctor. So what's happening is they're having more complications there. So what you can do, what is in your control, is contacting your providers. If you don't feel like going out, ask for a telehealth appointment. A lot of insurance companies, Medicaid, Medicare, have extended coverage to include telehealth during the pandemic. So make sure you're informed and capitalizing on those options too. What you don't want to do is just be so fearful it's at the expense of your own health condition. So you have to, you have to try to focus on what's in your control. I will say that all of the work does not fall on you all, the individuals. There has to be systemic change. And so I just pointed to things that you can do as an individual, but the systems that we all are a part of have to be working on educating providers, experiential exercises to raise their consciousness, systemic change within institutions, within the government. So it is definitely going to be a tough fight, but if everyone does their part and if we sort of focus on different levels and actionable items at different levels, I think that there could be, I'm hopeful that there can be some change. I mean, I've been studying health disparities since 2007. This is the most conversation publicly that I've ever heard about health disparities, ever. Again, I haven't been around that long, but since 2007. So it's getting attention, it's getting traction. Let's just hope that turns into change.
Absolutely. And
We're going to take, I'm sorry, Abiola, we're going to take one more question for Dr. Ali, and then we'll go to the next speaker. Michelle?
Okay. Good morning, everybody. My view on what is happening now. Yesterday, I went on a doctor's appointment for my eyes. I had my cane, and when I got to the office and I got to the door, I was told there was a sign there to stand outside until they come out and take your temperature. When they did and I went inside, the lady pointed to me at a computer. Misty, go and log in right there. Mark you, I'm standing with a cane. Obviously, something is wrong with my vision. And she's sending me over to a computer. Touchscreen computer to go log in. That's a red flag. I have a little vision, yes. When I went over there and I was trying, I wasn't doing it fast enough because this is new to me. And it keep kicking me back out to the beginning. Then all she did was to get some papers and to give me with a clipboard and say, okay, ma'am, sit there and fill it out. All of 4 sheets of paper with this whole heap of information and nobody to assist. So it's hard. And they're giving us some clause and you're to agree or not to agree. I don't know. They'll determine whether your visit was a visitation, or they'll determine if you're gonna need additional this and you'll have to pay co-pay, all sorts of stuff. So communicating in these offices and these times is very hard out there. Very hard. I spent 4 hours there yesterday. 4 hours there.
That challenging and why you were able to persevere. I would recommend to contact or send an email to that office, because sometimes, unfortunately, and this goes back to inequity, just oversight, that people who are in privileged positions, so that includes people who are able-bodied or people who are healthy, are not socialized to think about the barriers that others may face. And so it really is an email education that will help educate and affect change in more ways than you think. So I would email the office or call or whatever.
Okay, thank you.
Absolutely. I would also, Paul, I just wanted to just say one thing too in response to the point that you brought up. I think one of the other reasons why we felt this conference was so important was precisely because a good number of the persons who have died at the hands of the police, who were black or brown, were also persons with mental health related disabilities.
Oh my, wow.
So because people are dying with disabilities, maybe because the police are not taking the time to investigate. I mentioned yesterday, for those who were on the call yesterday, right here in White Oak, Finan Byrne, who was black, mental health related disabilities, and of foreign descent, he was the one who rushed the police officers with a knife, and he got shot as a direct result.
Oh my God.
So I'm trying to bring, so today we want to try to get to how it is that we end up in these kind of situations. And I think that this is definitely an important point to address within the Black Lives Matter discussion. And that's why we're talking about it today.
Okay, I understand.
Okay, and so now going on to our, thank you, Dr. Ali. Going on to our next speaker, if Mr. Naral McMillan is on the line, he was going to share some of his thoughts and experiences about Black disabled lives. Go ahead, if you're on the line, Mr. McMillan. You can.
Mr. McMillan, press *6 and that will unmute you.
To get on the streets with a weapon.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay, now, in my situation, I'm sitting across the street in my neighborhood at my house with a neighbor, house to house. Car pulls up, jumps up. You can't tell a blind man if he's sitting in a vehicle. But all of a sudden he said, what is three black guys doing sitting in Durango on the side of the street? My buddy told him, we ain't right. Well, what did you think if you see a black guy sitting in a Durango? Step out. He said, well, hold up, my buddy is blind. He pulls the door. I'm carrying a cane, a folding cane. Now, if it had slipped out and extended, then it could be a different situation. Now, he's saying, put your hands on the car, and not listening to the command that I'm blind. And then the other officer telling them, okay, just be cool, just be cool. And he's snatching me behind my neck. Now, my buddy tried to tell him, yo, man, I told you he is blind. He's not paying attention to that. But what I'm saying is, the other guy told him, okay, just cool up. And he said, all right, now, oh, I didn't understand. What did he say for it? I said, no, that's his cane. But the folding cane in the door. Now, if that cane had fallen out and extended, now it would have been a different outcome. He would have figured it's a weapon and shoot everybody. However, when these guys approach you, and they don't know how to approach people in the first place. It's another incident. We're walking from the store, going to the car, and the guy pulled up on the driving store, said, my buddy stopped on the floor. The police cruising behind us and said, don't go open the car door yet. Yeah, why you all walking the park? Now look at you, are you drunk? And he said, excuse me, said, yeah, look at you. Stand with he was drunk. Said, officer, don't you see him holding a cane? I didn't talk to you. You have to put your hands up on the car. Now, the people by the service station said, hey, yo, man, don't you see the man have a cane? Then when he realized what they said, oh, my bad, man, I'm sorry, I did not. I just thought you was drunk. But the problem is, what I'm saying is, when they come upon, if you don't really take time to save your own life, trying to explain, it could be split-second decision when these guys or individuals come upon you. So I'm trying to say for people to really advocate for this and let even the police, the senators or somebody call the people and let them know they must have some discussion in training, at least in the cadet stage, in the recruiting stage, or at least about 6 months or 8 months training before they get on the streets of these guys and these people with this disability. Because they simply don't have a clue of what they're doing with disability.
Abdullah?
Yes.
I know that you've had this conversation with Mr. McMillan. There's some conversation in the chat that some people were having a difficult time understanding his story. Would you just be able to, in a few sentences, summarize?
Sure.
Sorry, I think it's the connection.
Yeah, the connection, or it might be an echo, or Mr. McMillan, if you're on speaker, maybe it would help even if you're not on speaker. But what he was sharing is an experience that he had as a man with who was visually impaired as well as a physical impairment. And he was saying that he and a buddy were him in a vehicle pulled to the side of the road, and the police approached the car. And when the police approached the car, I guess motioning them for them to get out, the friend in the vehicle indicated to the police officers that he was blind, or that he was blind, and that's one of the reasons why he couldn't follow that direction. He didn't really see him, and the police officer overreacted, wanted to, I guess, motion to drag him out of the vehicle, and pulled out his gun. And it was the police officer's partner that tried to say, slow your roll. The guy said that he's blind, didn't really see your instructions. So Mr. McMillan's recommendation going forward, and again, Mr. McMillan, make sure you interject if I've gotten the story wrong, but he suggests that the police may be one way for us to self-advocate, persons with disabilities. One way to self-advocate is to advise our local police departments of two things. One, of your presence within the community, so that they know who you are if they have to respond to you, but also two, that we encourage police departments, officers, to maybe do a 6-month training course or 6-month internship working with people with disabilities, so that they become accustomed to interacting with us. I don't know if that's already being done, but the idea of an internship, working with organizations, working with individuals with disabilities, getting accustomed to interacting with us in the communities where they serve, may lead to a reduction in the numbers of people with disabilities getting killed at the hands of the police because we did not understand the instructions that they were providing to us. Does that sound like a good summary, Mr. McMillan?
That's exactly right.
Are there any questions or responses or comments on what Mr. McMillan said?
Why are the police going around targeting blind people? That
Karpal, I didn't understand the question.
just why were the people going? Why were police going around targeting like the disabled and blind people? Like even though they were black.
So I don't know if they're actually targeting blind people or by color, but I do know that with people with and I'm sorry, this is Bong Dar Rosario. So I do know people with disabilities. You know, a lot of law enforcement don't really know how to handle you know, people with disabilities, whether it's a physical disability or a mental disability or an invisible disability. A lot of law enforcement doesn't know how to, you know, adapt to that. I don't know exactly where in the midst we are, but I do know that the Department of Motor Vehicles and MDOT are coming out with information and also cards for people with disabilities that want to sign up for these cards that actually state, you know, hey, I do have a disability. You know, I may not, you know, comprehend, or I may not, you know, follow your instructions completely, but that doesn't mean that I'm not trying to cooperate with you. I do have a disability. So I guess at least that way, you know, that law enforcement officer realizes that you do have a disability and can kind of either, you know, get someone else to assist or what have you. But I don't know right now when that's coming out. I'm actually in the midst of working out the language because I don't quite agree with the language. And this is the language that's being used right now that we're trying to implement here in Maryland is actually being used in New York. But I don't quite agree with the language right now. But it is something that we are working on.
Thank you, Bong. And I think that the direction that this discussion has taken, and thank you, Mr. McMillan, so much, is actually a brilliant segue into the next speaker's comments. Mr. Mike Sanders, who serves as the director of Independence Now's Money Follows the Persons. Mike, go ahead.
Good afternoon, everyone, and it's Michael Saunders. So, how's everybody? I hope you all can hear me. I'm having some internet troubles here, so if I go out, hopefully it'll come back on. But what I wanted to share today kind of piggybacks off of Dr. Ali. I could go on about the employment situation in which I've been a product of for many years now, being disabled. I've been in this wheelchair now, paraplegic, for 28 years. And seeking employment has not been always the great thing. You know, some blessings came along through Independence Now and some others who I basically, if I look at Independence Now, I fit in with Independence Now because everyone was, a lot of the employees were disabled. But if you go to a regular job and you're maybe the only one coming in a wheelchair, you're looked at immediately in a strange way. And at one point I had dreads. The dreads seemed to throw a lot of people off when I came in, along with being in a wheelchair, as well as being an African-American. I looked at that and I found myself trying to change for people. And I cut my hair off at one point because I felt as though if I do just this, then I fit in to what they're looking for to make a better way for me and my family, which was not the answer for me because it didn't make me feel good. I felt as though I was doing what I should do for the rest of the world to fit in. And then I'm not happy myself. That was a no-go. So, you know, but I didn't let that hold me back. I moved forward, and I'm gonna bring you up to speed on a day when I was driving. That's the employment part that I have for right now. That piece can stay all day. But as far as driving, I was driving down the Beltway one day, down 95. And I'm just going along just like everybody else, maybe doing about 5 or 6 over. I'm not gonna say I wasn't doing over the speed limit, but I'm only doing about 5 or 6 miles over the speed limit. And I see this trooper get behind me. So I said, okay, he's following me. He's going to eventually pull me over. So maybe a mile up the road, he did pull me over. And immediately when he pulled me over, I said to myself, this is not going to be good. I just had a feeling in my heart that it wasn't going to be good. So I pulled over, and the officer's just sitting there. And I'm saying, okay, what is he going to do? So I had to roll my window down, in which, you know, when you're down the Beltway, you got cars flying up and down so that no one can really hear other than zoom, zoom, zoom. And this officer is yelling at me through the loudspeaker to step out of my vehicle. Okay, so I'm trying to tell him by turning around, because again, I'm a paraplegic in the car. I'm trying to turn around and yell out the window at the same time with my hands out, telling them that I'm a paraplegic. He continuously to get frustrated and keeps yelling. I said, step out of the vehicle, you know, and like so I'm yelling back the same thing. I cannot get out. So maybe after about 3 or 4 or 5 attempts of him saying the same thing and me yelling back, he proceeds to walk to my vehicle. And when he comes to my vehicle, I can already see kind of red in the face, frustrated. So he says, did you hear what I said? And I told you to get out of the vehicle. And I immediately said, officer, my hands are on the dashboard, on the steering wheel, and I'm showing you this hand control, and I'm a paraplegic. Well, you should have said, officer, I'm yelling back to you. So everything he was trying to say was trying to make him right, when if he would have just took, and this piggybacks off where Abiola and probably some of us have already said, if training were in place for this officer to have done, that if a person says they're disabled or whatever else, then you take a different approach. You can't continuously be in your zone of being frustrated with me, and I'm trying to tell you that I'm a paraplegic. So then he proceeds to go on and tell me, well, I want your license and registration. Now here's where the part comes in at. He got his hand on his gun, and I'm getting ready to tell this officer that I have to go in my backpack to get my wallet out with my license in it. I'm only going to my backpack, officer, to get this license. Where's your backpack? It's on the back seat. Now I got to reach back, scared to death, frightened to death what he's going to do. So I said, officer, I'm going to leave one hand out here, and I'm going to reach for my bag. He's holding the gun. He said, got his hand on the gun the whole time. So I finally get the bag, and I'm going in. And everything that I'm doing, I'm trying to tell this officer over and over again, the next move I'm making, the next move I'm doing this, because I don't want him to do anything to, you know, harm me or anyone else, you know. So I'm like, well, I'm going in to get the license out. Once I get the license out, he begins to open my door, and, well, you don't look like you are handicapped. What do you mean? I said, wow. I said, officer, I drive with this hand control. If you look in my trunk, I have a wheelchair. Well, you should have said that. And he goes on. And I said, you know what, officer? Whatever it is you stopped me for, which turned out to be, after all, nothing, you all, because he had nothing to give me other than a hard time at that point. And when I left that point, I really went down the street and I just broke down, because I'm saying to myself, these are the officers that are supposed to be in charge of us, you know, to help us out here in the community. what if this man would have did something to me? And the opportunity arises with several times in which I've been out and you try to talk to an officer and explain to him that you're disabled, or he sees that you're disabled and you need some attention. They don't give it to you the proper way. You're treated in the same fashion as anyone else. Move, get from over here, do this, that, and other. Officer, I'm in a wheelchair. So I believe we're going back to what you're saying, the training and the techniques that they use and the understanding of a person with disability. I'm not going to say, and then he proceeds to say, well, what are you doing with this kind of car? Well, what the person with disabled, is a certain vehicle that you're supposed to drive? I don't understand, their concept of thinking, and it bothers me and it scares me to the point sometimes you really don't want to go out. Now, I live in Charles County. Charles County has a bad name about officers out here. But actually, I've seen some of the officers out here take more care of a person that's disabled than I have seen some of the other officers in other counties or whatever else. Maybe the training that they're getting out here may be better, but I don't know. So that's a nationwide thing that has to be researched. But I just say to everyone that's disabled, Black men or whatever, be cautious. Be cautious of what you're doing when you're driving or whatever else, and speak to them in the form that we can to make them understand who we are and what we're going through, and as being disabled and being fearful of what may happen because we are in this situation.
Thank you so much, Mike. That was very powerful. I appreciate that you shared that with us. Um, and that was very, very serious. And I think that that's one of the notes that we'll take, is going back and looking at, and Sarah will be working together on maybe further recommendations that we can give to our local police departments, particularly in Montgomery County and Prince George's County, the counties that Independence Now serves, and make these proposals to them, internships or training or spending time hearing from persons with disabilities about how they can be can work to be better servants to the constituents in the community. I wouldn't mind. I hope that you wouldn't mind if I would also ask you to share just one more epithet very briefly before we move on to the next speaker. And that was the story that you shared at our Independence Now staff retreat about perceptions of persons with disabilities, not necessarily related to Black Lives Matter, but the story you told about someone giving you something in your chair.
Okay. So, guess it was last year, right, sir? I can't remember, but I think it was last year. We were at the Nickel conference, and we were all out eating as a team. And I went outside for a moment, and I'm sitting on the side of the restaurant, right out front the door, and this lady walks by, and she hands me a bag with a biscuit or something in it. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking, she says, oh, have a great day. And I looked in the bag and I looked at the biscuit and I said, wow, do I look like I'm homeless, or I'm not eating? Or I couldn't believe that the fact that just because I was sitting outside in a wheelchair, she assumed that I hadn't eaten or whatever else. And I was just, I'm sitting there with, not just be, bougie. I'm sitting there with AirPods in my ear, an Apple Watch on, an Apple phone, and I'm dressed, I'm not looking like I didn't take a shower or anything. And she hands me this biscuit. And I'm just like, oh, wow. So, man, this is the perception that you have of people. Everyone's just in a wheelchair outside of a restaurant is waiting for help or something, looking for something.
Was that a Nickel, Michael?
Yes.
I remember that because
we
were at the restaurant, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I remember that. That's funny.
This happened last year?
No, I think that was 2 years ago.
I don't think you were there, Damien, this year. I think you were. There was a year
Sarah's
before
saying 2 years ago. So
yeah, that was 2 years ago.
So thanks, Mike. Thank you so much for your pointed points. We're going to move on. If Carmen Belmonte is on the line. Carmen, if you're on the line, we'd love for you to share your thoughts and reactions about the experiences of brown and black persons with disabilities.
So I've unmuted those that are on their cell phones. I believe you're on a cell phone, so you can go ahead and speak.
Carmen, if you're there, we can't hear you.
They're all off mute, Abiola, so maybe she's not on the line. Want to move to the next speaker.
Okay, in that case, hopefully Carmen will be able to get back online shortly. I'd like to introduce our next guest speaker, and that's going to be Miss Donna Walton. Miss Walton, thank you so much for joining us today. We would love to hear your thoughts as a counselor and a specialist in the area of mental health, but also as a woman with disabilities, professional woman with disabilities, woman of color. Please go ahead. You're on mute. You're on mute.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me, first and foremost. This has been a very powerful and charging conversation thus far, and I've really gathered so much from the speakers before me, and I had everything sort of outlined as to what I wanted to say, but now I'm just going to have to speak from my heart and just really tell you, what it looks like. What does disability look like? For me, my story is, what does a leg have to do with it? And so I'm going to start from that premise. What does disability have to do with it? And it has everything to do with it. And I'll share the stories that have given me the context of knowing that the intersection of my disability, being Black, female, and disabled, has definitely paved the way for how I interact in the world and how the world interacts with me. I'll start with the fact that I lost my leg to bone cancer in 1976. I was 18 years old. And at that time, I had no experience with disability. I had no idea what beyond the access of what disability would mean, but what the attitudinal aspects of what disability would mean for my life. So I'll start with my first experience and encounter with disability, that I knew that life's perceptions of me was not going to be what I saw myself as being, a powerful Black woman standing in my space, owning what I own, and walking freely in this world and making decisions. I'll start with my second grade student. I taught school, and I had a student who came up to my desk, and he said to me, "Miss Walton, no man will ever marry you because you have one leg." Now, that laid the groundwork as to what young people, or the perceptions and ideas, and how young boys, if you will, could be socialized to think about women or girls, about disability, about body, about imagery. He felt his story, his experience from 7 years old had already told him that if he sees a girl with a disability, that she's meaningless. She doesn't have, any worth, if you will. So that was my first encounter, when I knew that my disability was having an impact, that the way people are socialized about disability was not going to be very, kind to me. The next experience I had dealt with a young man who I dated in dated in high school, and then later in college. This young man said to me, when I took off my prosthesis, "Miss Walton," he called me then, I would be more comfortable if you put your leg on. because, well, he actually didn't explain. He actually abruptly left. And I put that, I have a story about that more extensively in my book, Shattered Dreams and Broken Pieces, which is my memoir that just sort of talks about all these experiences. But he really left. He really could not fathom me, with one leg. So that was another blow to my perception or to my self-esteem, that having a disability was not going to be what society was going to value me as. Wholeness, that it was not, that disability is a human experience, that my having one leg had nothing to do with my overall abilities and efficacy in life. The third experience kind of relates to Michael's experience, Mr. Saunders, I do believe, and that relates to employment. So I applied for a position, and this position was the position of a lifetime, I thought. I was trying to be a broadcaster at the time, and it was an internship. And so one of the criteria is that you had to write a story to show that. You had to show how you looked on camera, and then you had to have the sort of face-to-face interview. The face-to-face interview, you walk into a room, you have a seat, and the interviewer meets you. So immediately when I walk into the room, I wasn't even settled in my seat. And the first question the interviewer asked me is, how do you think you would get a story if you had, how do you think you would get the story if you had to run for that story? Again, I walk into the room with a cane and I walk with a noticeable limp. So I wasn't even comfortable. And right then the perception, the discrimination, if you will, was that I was not going to be able to perform that position. So those three encounters that I've just shared with you have set the stage for me that shows how the intersectionality of my disability, of my race, and my gender is always in play. It is not my imagination. It is very real. Disability, Black disability lives do matter, because it is our race that pretty much shows up first, that is always going to place us behind the eight ball, if you will. It's going to always place us at the disparities that Dr. Ali talked about, the health disparities, because there too lies discrimination. And I could give you a story there. So with women's health in particular, I have gone to doctors, gynecologists in particular, and the questions that are asked of me are not asked of my non-disabled counterparts. For example, are you sexually active? Well, why would not? I mean, I would need that question. My health, my birth, what is it? Healthcare around, what do I want to say? Having babies, my sexual health.
OGBYN?
Yes, OBGYN. Didn't made the assumption, the perception again, that because I have a disability that I would not be sexually active. So therefore he didn't need to give me that question. Another example, there are many examples, but I think I want to just share and lay the context that being Black and disabled, there is a sort of, there is perception there. And you're automatically sort of judged and valued on that misconception that you're not abled, that you're not worthy, that you're not sexual, that you're not worthy of love. All of these play into our psyches, and they do wear you down, constantly wear you down. Now, of course, we have ways that we can sort of combat that, if you will. We can be empowered. We hear those words tossed around all the time. Be empowered, stand up, advocate, agitate. And these words are they are meaningful. But I want to just share a few things that you can do. And the speakers have somewhat alluded to them already. You do have to stand up. You do have to speak out. You do have to write. Writing, communication are the two most valuable resources as Black people with disabilities that we can have. any opportunity. Your protest looks like your protest. It doesn't necessarily have to mean that you stand with a sign and walk in with crowds of people. You can definitely write letters. You can coalesce and get around people who have the same vision as you do, because we are powerful in numbers. You can always, and I think this is one that I always use. I go in silence and I think about what would be the most powerful tool that I can use, given my abilities. And that is being unapologetically Black and being unapologetically disabled. I don't want to ever hide my disability. And therein lies another problem for me sometimes, because my disability can be normalized in that I wear a prosthetic. And my prosthetic becomes now an invisible disability, if you will. It's not as obvious. So when I walk into a room, someone may not note that I do need accessible avenues. But because I walk, because the cane and the limp, that's one area that says something's up. But because you don't see it per se, you don't see me walking with crutches and with one leg, you don't get the message. So what's powerful about being Black and disabled and having to show up when you don't, sometimes your disability is not visible, is that you have to sometimes disclose. And I always say sometimes you have to let people know who you are. You cannot hide, because our race is going to always be judged, but your disability may not be always known. So sometimes you have to disclose. I make it a point to always disclose my disability. I try to speak up for others whose voice may not be as loud as mine. I do that because sometimes if we don't speak up for others, then the violence continues, the ignorance continues, the discrimination continues, the oppression continues. These things are very real. They can only change if we show up in our space the way we need to show up, whatever that looks like. And I always say that there's no right way to protest. The only wrong way is not to. So I want to share also, I was moved, of course, we're moved right now by the ADA. This is the celebration of the ADA. And we know how valuable and how important that legislation is in terms of giving us access. It's very powerful. But one of the things the ADA has not done for us, it hasn't given us the attitudinal shifts that's required from our society at large. It hasn't given us the perceptions. It hasn't removed those perceptions and barriers that exist in people's minds and consciousness towards around what disability is supposed to look like. We don't look, why does it have to be a look associated with that? There's no look associated with that. And I still confront that quite often. It's not a day that I can walk out into the street and someone judges me because I don't look disabled. A classic example, I have a great sports car, love my sports car. So I can pull into a parking space, a handicap embossed parking space. And the first thing a person will yell penalties at me because what? I don't look handicapped, for one, which is number one, a wrong word to use, of course, in today's society. But then because I drive a sports car, you're not even supposed to be driving a sports car. Persons with disabilities are not driving sports cars. That has to be challenged. That's one of the things that ADA doesn't have to do. Cannot do or has not done. So I just want to set the stage. Disability is a part of the spectrum of human difference and of Black variance. Black people with disabilities have contributed significantly to Black life and culture. We're resilient, we're ingenuous, we have talents. We need to be highlighted. We need to be uplifted and celebrated. We need to learn from, and we need to replicate the power that we have within. so that others can have it. I want to leave you with this. I want to leave you with John Lewis's words. No matter, we are going to go through challenges. It is never going to be easy. So I don't want to even give the perception or the vision that it's easy. But I do want to share what John Lewis said. He said, do not get lost in a sea of despair. He said, be hopeful, be optimistic. He said, our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a month, or a year. It is a struggle of a lifetime. He said, never be afraid to make some noise and get into good trouble, necessary trouble. And that's what I want to leave, that no matter how much we go through as Black people with disabilities, we must always never give up the fight and always stay in good trouble. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Walton. I would love to invite persons who are interested, have comments or questions for Dr. Walton, or to respond to some of the things that she said. We'll open up the floor for questions. And I think that Carmen has been able to join as well. Questions from the audience? From participants?
Hi, this is Darlene. I have a like the same. I was going through the same problems with my staff, and she.
Go ahead, Darlene.
Okay, I was going through the same problems too, and my staff were disrespectful to me, and I got cerebral palsy, like everybody else, like a disability, and she like, I don't care about your disability. So I was like, why you don't care about my disability? And she like, I don't know, I just don't care. And that hurt my feelings inside. So that's why I'm glad that I can express my feelings to independent now of how I feel. Because it made me feel really upset.
And I can understand how that can make you feel upset. But here's where, Darlene, you take control. You take control, Darlene, because you have to know thyself. You remember that you may have heard the phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words would never hurt me.
Yeah.
I want you to embrace that, because you have to know thyself. When you look in the mirror every day, there's one thing I always do, and this is just my little way of doing this. But when I look into the mirror every day, you know what I say? Well, first of all, I always thank God for giving me breath to even look in the mirror. But secondly, I say, you a bad mama jamma. And I use that because that empowers me. And I just want you to look in the mirror every day, Darlene, and give yourself permission to be the bad mama jamma that you are.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, that was awesome, Dr. Walton. But I want to also say that Darlene spoke to me about that issue, and Darlene did speak up, because it's very important that when those types of things happen, that you advocate for yourself, and that person no longer works for her. So she did speak up.
Fantastic.
Dr. Walton, do you have some recommendations for action steps? And I'd definitely like to circle back to Kayla, Samara, Kapal, Daniel, anyone else who hasn't had a chance to speak about what kind of action should we, as a group, as a community, move forward? What kind of action should we take going forward? The first one on the table, we heard from Mr. Norwood McMillan, which was to recommend to the local police departments for some kind of internship or training, either with a disability rights organization, like a Center for Independent Living, or to have maybe some of us show up at their offices at the police department to get them accustomed to working with us. What are some other suggestions?
Those are excellent suggestions. And the only thing I could actually add to those is that when you create your own curriculum, create your own curriculum for those police departments. Network with Black social workers, network with the Black therapists, give them, provide them the paradigms by which you want persons with disabilities to be treated, the treatment plans for persons with disabilities. I think we can never get too much of the sensitivity, disability awareness and sensitivity training. I think that that's valuable. I think that we should package that, market that all over to organizations that, and grantees, whomever you serve, the community, and so that we can be that example. I think we have to be the change we want to see. And so we can give the recommendations, but sometimes we just have to do the work.
Kayla, I saw your hand go up. Did you have an action that you'd like to recommend?
So I would personally talk to family members who educate your family members about the issues and show them like statistically of what Black people or Black, biracial and brown people face as people with disabilities. And it'd be mostly Black biracial people, because sometimes biracial people with Black genetics can have similar problems with Black people because of their Black genetics. But it's like you should still have a conversation with them, with your family members, so they can understand, and just talk to your family and about it, and talk to them what other ways you can say, like protests or petitions and stuff like that.
And I just want to also add to tell your stories. I think it's important to tell our stories. Always tell any opportunity that you can have to tell your stories. I think that's really important. Publish your books. Always just be available to tell your stories. That's really important as well.
Okay.
So we have three folks, Aviola, that have their hands raised. First, it was Chika Nakata.
Chika Danaka.
Tanaka. Chika Tanaka. Are you ready? Chika?
Sorry, I pressed the wrong button. I was trying to unmute myself, and then I muted me back up again. So, some things here. Someone said about good. The presenter said, I think I came in a little late, but I caught the last part of it where like the last part of the words. He said something about good trouble. Yeah. There's no difference between good trouble and bad trouble. It's basically like good trouble is good good punishment, and bad trouble is regular punishment or regular trouble. And then there's an old saying, somebody said, sticks and stones will break my bones, but words can never hurt me. It's actually true. Nobody's gonna hurt me with my words. But if you push me or if you knock me down, then you will hurt me. So it's just like this us people as blind people or independent people, we're trying to stop what's going on in the world, but there's no control over that. It's only we just got to pray. We just got to ask God come fix this country and fix this world, and just tell God, as blind and independent people, we can conquer the world. We're more than conquerors. We just got to just be careful what we do and what we say, and what goes on, what goes out there. There's something in the word, something in the word that says, "Do unto others if you want them to do unto you," and that's what should be. That's what should be in the world. They should stop this crappy stuff what they're doing and turn to Jesus and see what they have in store.
And now lower to meeting.
Okay, thank you, Chico. Next comment, I think I saw Deborah's hand up.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I can speak now. Okay, this is for Dr. Walton. Hi, Dr. Walton.
Hi, Deborah.
I just wanted to say you're a beautiful and accomplished young lady. And so my question, since you brought it up in your presentation, you mentioned what the little boy said when you were seven, when you were 7, and then you mentioned the gentleman when you were in high school. So at this point, in your stage of your life, were you able to meet someone that was worthy of who you are?
You know, that's a beautiful question. And I sometimes when I give larger presentations, I always make the joke that I hope the gentleman didn't curse me by saying that no man would ever marry you. So I'm not married, but I have found absolutely wonderful men along my journey who have loved and accepted me as who I am as a woman who happens to live with a disability. But I do want to share that there's still challenges. And I'll just share a quick story of that when I was doing online dating, that I would sometimes still hide behind the screen because immediately I would hide behind the screen by not sharing that I was an amputee, because I knew immediately when I posed that I was an amputee, the whole visual would change, the perception, because we're talking about perception and socialization. You know, men unfortunately have been socialized, you know, to think that women are about the sum of their body parts, hips, thighs, breasts, you know, all those things. So when those things are missing, right, then men don't tend to value that. But of course, that's some, and I'm not talking about all, so please. But I do want to say we do have a long way to go about changing the perceptions about disability. And I have an organization that I'm working with called the Divas with Disabilities Project that is doing just that. It's trying to change the perception of what disability looks like by promoting Black and brown women through various media platforms. So we're showing up in Hollywood. We're showing that, you know, because we have a disability does not detract from our beauty. Beauty is a construct that has no limitations and no boundaries.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I wanted to just bring it back to another one of the action points. This is Abiola speaking again. And I think throughout the discussion today and yesterday, one of the things I think we didn't just actually say the words, but that is self-advocacy along with system advocacy. And the self-advocacy, speaking up for yourself, you know, letting your voice be heard, but also expressing what your needs and what your preferences are, and not being afraid to do that. But also with the system advocacy, as Lori had suggested, picking up the phone and contacting your representatives to be able to let them know what it is that you need. Working with local disability rights organizations to be able to forward as a group recommendations or preferences or proposals to be able to change certain policies. But bringing it right back to where today started, which was the importance of access to quality and affordable health care for persons with all disabilities, especially given the disparities that the COVID virus has revealed, but also the issue of intersectionality, which Dr. Walton so beautifully touched on. So I think if as we go forward, we want to continue to think about having ongoing conversations about this topic, continuously developing proposals and recommendations.
Abiola, I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to make sure Lori's question gets answered. I think she wanted something to Dr. Walton.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I know you can't see some of the hands raised, so have to.
I actually wanted just to make a comment and a suggestion for an action step. Our MFP expert who spoke so eloquently about his experience with a policeman, and he handled the situation so well, and that is also very, very important about how we, when we are approached by a policeman, how we have to interact to protect ourselves so that the situation doesn't escalate. And I think that his words and his advice on how a person with a disability should handle themselves in this situation is also crucial to that training piece for officers. In other words, just as an officer knows how to interact with a person with a disability, we as PWDs have to know how to interact with the situation as well, so it doesn't get out of control. Our MFP expert did an excellent job, and that needs to be relayed to others.
Agreed. We only have 4 minutes left for today's conference and protest. And at this point in time, I'd like to invite everyone who has already done your protest for today's online march. Your poster, that you can take it out so that it can be seen, because we're still broadcasting live on Facebook, streaming live on Facebook. So if you've got your poster out, then and you want to hold it up so we can see, hold up your posters. Hold up your posters.
And you guys, if you scroll in the chat group, if you scroll all the way up to the top, you can see the chant that we're going to be doing.
Yes. Okay. So Shannon is going to start us off. Okay.
Yola is going to start us off. Yay.
Okay. All right.
Is anybody taking a screenshot with the?
Oh, so I'm working on all of that. So Abiola start us off.
Okay, so what we'll do is we'll start with one chant. We'll do just a couple of chants for the next few minutes. But let's see. We'll start with show me what does democracy look like? Oh, I messed it up, Shannon. Tell me again.
That's okay. So Abiola, we're going to start on yours. If you scroll all the way up to the top, it says Black, Brown, Disabled Lives Matter. And then the call is, when I say Black and Brown disability lives, you say matter.
Matter.
So
Okay.
Black and Brown disability lives
matter.
Matter. Okay. When I say Black and Brown disabled lives.
Matter.
All right, so then, yeah, you have to be on mute.
It's hard when you're doing it like this. Unmute yourselves, guys, please. And hold your pictures all the way up to the camera on your desktop, laptops, phones, whatever.
Everybody can see. All right, so we'll start again. This one is Black and Brown Disabled Lives Matter. So when I say Black and Brown Disabled Lives, you say matter. Black and Brown Disabled Lives.
Matter.
Black and Brown Disabled Lives.
Matter.
Black and Brown Disabled Lives.
Matter.
Black and Brown Disabled Lives.
Matter.
Black and Brown Disabled Lives.
Matter.
Okay, next one. Say their names. I'm going to say a name. You say his name or say her name. George Floyd.
Say his name.
George Floyd.
Say his name.
George Floyd.
Say his name.
Denon Bear.
Say his name.
Charlie Taylor.
Say her name.
Okay. We'll do no justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. No justice, no peace.
No justice, no peace.
Keep it going. No justice.
No peace.
No justice.
No justice. No
No
peace.
peace.
No peace.
Justice.
No
No
peace.
peace.
No justice. No
No
peace. No justice. No
No
peace.
No
No
justice.
justice.
No peace. When I say, show me what democracy looks like, you say, this is what democracy looks like. Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Looks like.
Show me what democracy looks like.
This is what democracy looks like.
Show me what democracy looks like.
This is
This is what democracy looks like.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. You got the screenshots?
I got the screenshots.
All right. Woo-hoo! You guys did a great job. I want to thank you so much for being part of Independence Now's two-part, two-day online conference and protest. I would like to thank all of the speakers from today, Dr. Mana Ali, Dr. Walton, Paul McMillan, Mike Saunders, Mike Saunders, all the participants. Tarita, thank you for helping with the captioning, and Tina, thank you as well. We want to thank you all the participants for your comments. Independence Now is so appreciative of your ongoing support. And we hope that you will take today's conference and go forward. I'd like to give an opportunity to our Independence Now's executive director, Sarah Basehart, to also close us out and say a couple of words. Sarah?
I just want to say thank you for everyone for participating, whether you were speaking or asking questions or giving us action steps or holding up those excellent signs and chanting. We appreciate it. I know we're pretty much out of time, so I've been putting all the action steps in the chat, and Shannon and I are going to make sure those get saved. So then your next job, it's not over, right? Protesting is not enough, as we've heard many times. We have to take some serious action steps, and that is our plan at Independence Now. This is not ending today. So you're going to see sessions that follow some of these action steps and ideas. You're going to see us reporting on how we're connecting with other organizations that are doing this hard work already. For instance, all that police training has been happening in Maryland through the Ethan Saylor Alliance, through the Maryland Department of Disabilities, and many other organizations ever since Ethan was killed by the police in Frederick a number of years ago. And so but we've never been part of that work. So we can take a step. We heard you. This is important. This is the next thing to happen. And we don't know what's happening with our local police. So that's an excellent step we can take. So we're going to be calling on you. Work is not done, folks. Work is not done. We're going to ask for your help on moving on these next action steps as we move Independence Now, taking steps against racism. Thank you.
So are we going to have another session tomorrow or something?
Yes, sir.